Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Today I'm doing part 3 of the Ryzen 5 1600X computer build giveaway video series, Modified Why Vlog. This isn't really so much as a why am I building it this way, because this is what the company sent me. It's more of a how can you customize it, what might you do differently, what are your different options, and what benefits do those options provide. This is going to be a conversational video where I talk about the CPU, the RAM, motherboard, video card, etc. What are the pros and cons of these parts? What alternatives might you consider? And not just the companies that sponsored this giveaway. I will of course talk about their products, but I do think about you, the viewer, first as well. So I'll talk about other companies and basically how can you customize your machine to accomplish whatever it is you're trying to do. Linked down in the video description below will be the full playlist of this series, including the build of this, the giveaway announcement, and then ultimately some game performance tests and other non-gaming tests. Linked down there also to Amazon and Newegg will be all the parts that I talk about, or at least most of them in this video, as well as the links to my Twitter, Twitch, Patreon, and some other things down there. Please check those out. I'd greatly appreciate it. First, let's talk about the Ryzen 5 1600X CPU. 6 cores, 12 threads, up to 4.0 gigahertz out of the box with an XFR auto overclock to 4.1. For $230, wow, that's incredible. The reality is a year ago, if you wanted 6 cores, 12 threads, you were buying Broadwell E's i7 6800K, installing it on an expensive X99 motherboard. You would have spent double the money for the same level of performance a year ago. The reality is Ryzen is an incredible value for the money. But the question might be is, should you buy a Ryzen 5 1600X? Well, actually, in my opinion, the better deal is Ryzen 5 1600. It's only $20 less, and yes, the out-of-the-box clock speed is 400 megahertz slower with a turbo to 3.6 rather than 4.0, but it's unlocked and overclockable, so you can easily set it higher. But most importantly, it comes with the excellent Wraithspire cooler. That is a 95 watt TDP cooler that will easily run that chip at about 3.7 to 3.8 gigahertz, depending upon the luck of the draw of your chip, out of the box without having to play around with a lot of settings. For most people, that's the deal. It's not just that it's $20 less expensive, it's that it comes with a cooler. The flip side is if you buy a Ryzen 5 1600X, you've got to buy a cooler. Now, if you want something similar in performance to the Wraithspire, you can buy the Hyper T2, which is a $20 cooler, the Hyper 212 Evo, which is a $30 cooler, or the Hyper 612, which is a $35 to $40 cooler, and get superior cooling performance, but at a higher price. If you add, say, a Hyper 212 Evo for $30, plus the $20 higher price of the chip, and it's really $50 more money. Now, don't misunderstand me. The Hyper 212 Evo is a great cooler. There's a reason why it's the #1 best-selling CPU cooler on Amazon. Great price to performance. It's quiet. It provides better cooling performance than the stock coolers. Even the Wraithspire, as good as it is, the Hyper 212 Evo is better. But you're spending $50 more for what? 200 megahertz, maybe 300 megahertz faster. It's 10% CPU speed and perhaps a net effect of 5% faster on your computer speed. You really are never going to notice it. In my opinion, the sweet spot and the value with Ryzen is at 3.7 gigahertz, not 4.0. In truth, if you're willing to spend an extra $50 to get the 1600X, my opinion is you're better off spending another $50 and going to the Ryzen 7 1700. Now, it's true that the Ryzen 7 1700 is not a 4 gigahertz CPU either, but it's 8 cores, 16 threads, and it comes with the Wraithspire RGB cooler. Yay, RGB in 2017, but it is a very, very nice cooler. So for about $100 more than a Ryzen 5 1600, you actually go to an 8-core, 16-thread CPU, which will last you that many more years before you have to upgrade. As games and programs and even Windows expands into using more cores, it's just going to extend the life of your machine before you have to upgrade. I don't like the term future-proof, but it kind of future resists your machine. It gives you that much more time before you have to think about an upgrade. So that's where I would put the money if you want to spend more than a Ryzen 5 1600. Now, some people are going to disagree and say, well, I want more gaming performance, or I want more per core performance. I want that 4.1 auto overclock out of the box. Fair enough, I understand. Ryzen 5 1600X is a great choice and you'll be happy with it for many years. I'm just looking at it from the point of view of value for the money, how many units of performance per dollar spent are you getting, and 1600X is kind of an odd spot in between the 1600 and 1700 in my opinion. Now, you can't talk about CPUs without talking about CPU coolers. I've already mentioned some of the coolers back there. Now, there certainly are others from different brands as well. Generally, within a given price point, most of the coolers are pretty close to each other. A $30 cooler is a $30 cooler for the most part. There are exceptions, but that is generally true. The more interesting conversation from my perspective is how much cooler should you buy? Now, in this particular machine, we installed the MasterLiquid 120 Lite from Cooler Master. It is a $50 120 millimeter liquid cooler. That is a great value for the money. Most 120 millimeter liquid coolers are $60 to $65 or more, so breaking that $50 price barrier is very nice. On the Ryzen 5 1600X, however, that's the most cooler that I would personally install. Again, if you're going to spend more money than that, buy a Ryzen 7. That sort of is at the very top of what I would put on that chip. Same is true for the i5s, by the way, both 7th and the upcoming 8th generation. If you're thinking of buying an i5K chip and you want to overclock, the $50 120 liquid cooler is the most that I would spend. Or perhaps the Hyper 612 behind me is also a great choice. Again, if you want the 240 or 280 millimeter coolers you see back there from any of the companies, Cooler Master, Corsair, EVGA, NZXT, etc., again, step up to the i7 or the Ryzen 7 before you spend that kind of money on a cooler. Two examples of some recent testing that I've done. Ryzen 7 1800X, which has an out-of-the-box turbo speed of 4.0 and XFRs above that, but runs at 3.7 gigahertz fixed when all the cores are loaded. On that Hyper 612 back there, 65 degrees under AIDA 64 stress testing. The fan speed was turning at just under 1000 RPM, nearly completely silent. To get an 8-core 16-thread chip running at 65 degrees on full stress testing on a under $40 cooler, that's a deal. Now, if you want to overclock that to 4 gigahertz, that wouldn't be enough. I would then go with a 240 or 280 millimeter liquid cooler if you want to overclock that chip to 4 gigahertz. It really does use a lot more power and makes a lot more heat when you push it to 4 gigahertz fixed on 8 cores. The other test that I did recently is I built a Skylake X system, i7 7820X, 8 cores, 16 threads. Now that chip will turbo boost to 4.5 out of the box, but when put under stress test, all 8 cores run at 4.0 fixed on the out-of-the-box configuration. Now, if you watch that build video, that has a 280 millimeter cooler in it, the Corsair H110i. It's a nice cooler, although I was disappointed with how loud it was in the out-of-the-box fan configuration. They turn much too quickly. It has good cooling performance, but it is loud. But thanks to the Corsair Link software, I turned the fans down to 600 RPM. Yes, that is extremely low, and they are utterly silent when they're at 600 RPM. You cannot hear them at all. 55 degrees on the Skylake X processor in stress testing at 4.0 gigahertz. That's pretty good. Now, when I overclocked the chip to 4.5 on all 8 cores, which it did just fine, the fans did have to be turned up quite a bit and they were much noisier. So if I keep that cooler in there, I probably will end up replacing those fans. Or I might stick that cooler back there, the 280, because those fans are quieter than the Corsair is. Now, when it comes to the motherboard choice, boy, there are a lot of options available on the market right now. As I said before, I have not actually used a BioStar board before. This is my first time. This is a nice board because it includes more features than the bigger companies like ASUS and MSI provide. 2 RGB headers, dual BIOSes, an extra 120mm RGB fan, all for $100. Compared to the other $100 boards, it's a very feature-packed board. But I do understand that not everybody wants to go with BioStar. They are a smaller company, not a new company, by the way. They've been around for a while. They're just not as big in the West as they are in other parts of the world. So if you want to go with an ASUS or an MSI board, frankly, almost any of their B350 boards would be great choices for Ryzen 5. Would I buy an X370 board for Ryzen 5? Absolutely not. I would not waste the money. If you want a fancier motherboard with more features, it should be on a Ryzen 7 as far as I'm concerned. Now, some people will disagree with me. They'll say, well, I have 2 graphics cards, I need the Crossfire or SLI support, or I want the extra ports or features. Well, fair enough, that's fine. There are some budget X370 boards that cost less. But do keep in mind, there's no performance difference between X370 and B350. Windows isn't going to run faster, your games aren't going to run faster. The chipset is just basically a feature set difference, and the main feature is SLI support. There are even, however, now a few X370 boards, especially budget boards, missing the SLI support, which surprised me. So do keep in mind that if you see some $100 or $120 X370 boards, look really closely. You might find they don't have SLI support. At that point, all you're getting is a couple of USB ports and 2 more SATA ports for your money. Now, this board for $100 is fully featured, but you can spend a lot less than $100 on a motherboard. Currently, there are several boards available in about the $70 price range. Now, they're generally micro ATX boards. They're a bit smaller. Some of them have either fewer RAM slots or fewer expansion slots. But if you're putting together a basic system, something maybe $1,000 or less, and you don't plan to do a lot of upgrading in the future, that might be all you need. That $30 save there buys you more solid-state drive storage space or more RAM, or it buys you something else, maybe an upgraded graphics card. It all helps. So don't feel that you have to get a full-size ATX board if you don't plan on adding a lot of extra things to your system. You don't care about the extra ports or the extra expansion slots. One common question that I've been asked recently is, why are there now premium B350 boards? A good example is the Asus Republic of Gamers Strix B350-F board. Now, it was retailing for about $130, although it's been discounted recently. I've seen it down around the $100 price range after mail-in rebates, which puts it pretty close to the other boards. Now, it is a nicer looking board and has some upgraded features. But what you're really getting with those boards are upgraded sound chips, sometimes upgraded LAN chips. Most of the B350 boards are going to have a Realtek LAN chip. Some of the nicer B350 boards have an Intel chip. Slightly lower CPU utilization, slightly better driver support. It's not major, but it's nice. Some people like it. The Realtek audio chip is often upgraded. Most of the cheaper B350s will have an 800 series Realtek, which has a worse signal-to-noise ratio and maybe some fewer features than the 1200 series Realtek, which can be found on some of the nicer boards. Things like that differentiate the higher and lower end boards. So when you see a $70 B350 board and a $120 B350 board, you go, why in the world would anybody spend the extra money? More USB ports, often with an add-on chip supporting Gen 2 10 gigabit per second. They often have better sound chips, better LAN chips, that sort of thing. So that's what you're paying for the extra money. Honestly, for most people, the $70 boards are probably a better deal. There is one very important point to make when it comes to overclocking with Ryzen, however, between B350 and X370. B350 boards generally only support what's called offset voltage. If you want to go beyond 3.7 fixed, if you want to buy a 1600X and take it to 4.0 fixed, or if you want to buy a 1700X or 1800X and run it 4.0 or even 4.1 fixed on all the cores, an X370 may be worth the money because it's much easier to get a fixed voltage setting. On the X370 boards, you can simply go in and type in 1.35 volts, 1.3725. You can type in 1.4 volts. On the B350s, you can't. Now, the B350s are absolutely fine if you want to buy a Ryzen 5 1600 or a Ryzen 7 1700 and run it at 3.7. And the reason is you don't need to mess with the voltage. You can simply set it to a 37 multiplier or, depending upon the company, a 3700 clock speed setting in the BIOS. Press F10, reboot, you're good to go on the included Wraithspire cooler. But in the case of this build, for example, the downside is trying to run at 4 gigahertz is the offset on the voltage. You have to type in a 0.2 or a 0.25 or a 0.15 offset. You can't just type in 1.35 or 1.37 volts on the B350 boards like you can on the X370s. Another reason why I'd just buy a Ryzen 5 1600, set it to 3.7 and be a happy camper. Moving on to video cards, we have an awesome graphics card in this computer that you can't currently buy. The RX 570 4GB card. It is an awesome 1080p gaming card, and if it were available for its launch price of $170, I would be shouting at you to go buy one, because if you want to play games at 1080p, it's a great value for the money. You currently can't buy these cards for a whole lot less than $300. That's crazy. Don't buy one at those prices. I'm filming this in September of 2017. The cryptocurrency craze is currently going strong, and all the RX 570s and 580s are way overpriced at the moment. Now, if you're watching this video in the future and you go, what are you talking about? These things are $170 everywhere. Fair enough. Go buy one. It's a great card. However, right now in September of 2017, if you want to play games at 1080p, and by games I mean Battlefield 1, Ghost Recon Wildlands, Prey, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, if you want to play those kinds of games, it begins and ends at the GTX 1060 3GB card. They're currently available for $200, give or take, from a variety of companies. Now, what about a 1070? They're overpriced because of cryptocurrency. The 1060 3GB cards are not, because the 3 gigs don't have enough VRAM to really do cryptocurrency mining very well. The 6GB 1060s are currently way too expensive. They're about a $70 price premium over the 3GB cards right now. I would never pay that much for a 6GB 1060. I did a video on my channel last year talking about the difference between the 3 and the 6GB cards. That video still holds. I probably need to do an updated version just because people look at it, they go, wow, this is kind of old, maybe the information's out of date. It really isn't. A few months ago, the 6GB cards were lower in price, and I actually said a few months ago, buy a 6GB card, because they were down to just $20 difference. If you can find a 6GB card for $20 or $30 more than a 3GB 1060, by all means get it. It's a good deal at that price. But right now, they're way further apart than that. So the 3GB 1060s are the deal. Now, if you look at the 1060 and go, that's just not enough performance. I want 100 frames a second. I want 144 frames per second. I want the best possible performance, or I want to future-proof my machine and I want to get performance for the next 2 or 3 years without having to upgrade right away. Great, get a GTX 1080. They're going to run you about $500, and they should give you 3 solid years of AAA gaming performance without complaint at 1080p. Now, they'll give you maybe a year and a half of 1440p gaming performance, but they won't give you 3 years at that resolution, but they will give you 3 years at 1080p, but you are spending more than twice as much money. Please note, the GTX 1080 is double the performance of a 3GB 1060, so you are getting value for the money. It's a good card, and currently they are less than $100 more than a 1070, which are all too expensive at the moment. All this price information is subject to change. If you're not watching this video in September of 2016, this may all change, but right now, that's where it's at. What about the 1080 Ti's and RX Vega? Well, that's way out of place for a machine of this caliber. You shouldn't be having a Ryzen 5 or i5 anything if you're looking at those cards. Even a 1080 is a little outclassed for this processor, but yes, I would put a GTX 1080 in here, and I would even put an RX Vega 56 in here if you could buy one for a normal price. Cryptocurrency mining and the shortages, you can't buy an RX Vega 56 or 64 at anything approaching normal price. RX Vega 56 should be $400, RX Vega 64 should be $500. Don't pay any more than that. Now, if you can find one for that price, great, but currently they're way above that, so forget it. The 1080 Ti's are a good value at around $700 to $750, but even those are becoming hard to find. The cryptocurrencies are buying them, and currently they're none available for under $750. So how much performance do you want? But again, if you're buying a 1080 Ti, it's not going to be put into this. You're going to have more power supply, more case, a Ryzen 7 or an i7, so it's really outclassed by this machine. One quick note, GTX 1050 and 1050 Ti and AMD RX 560. Those cards are available for reasonable prices, but for this level of machine, don't buy them. There's too much of a performance deficit dropping down to those cards. The RX 560 is nearly half the performance of the 570. The GTX 1050, nearly half the performance of the 1060. Now, they do cost less. They cost about half the price of those cards. But if you're buying a Ryzen 5 1600 or 1600X or an i5 K chip and you're putting together a machine like this and you plan to do gaming, those cards are really out of place. Now, where the 1050 or the RX 560 makes sense is if you're putting together a machine like this for content creation or programming or software development or virtual machines or anything else other than gaming, if you just need a reasonably good graphics card and you're on a budget, you don't need a 1060 if you're doing non-gaming tasks. But if the word gaming approaches anywhere near a Ryzen 5 1600X, 1060 3GB is the least you should buy. System memory, how much do you need, how fast should you buy it, and do you need RGB RAM? Well, first of all, RGB RAM. Well, of course you don't need it. That's a personal preference. Do you want Christmas on your desk or not? The current price premium for RGB RAM is, give or take, about $25 in the same speed and classification and everything else. So if you want to add RGB RAM, another $25, give or take. Then we come down to how much do you need. Ryzen 5 1600 or higher, 16 gigabytes is the absolute minimum. Now I understand extreme budget machines, if you're putting together a Ryzen 3 1200 or 1300X, if you have maybe an i5 7500 or 7400 locked processor, fair enough, 8 gigabytes might make sense. If you're building this level of machine, there is no reason in the world to put anything less than 16 gigabytes in here. Windows will use it, modern games will use it, multitasking will use it. Open 8 tabs in Chrome and you'll use half of it right there. 16 gigs or bust. Do you need 32 gigs? I don't think so on Ryzen 5 1600 or 1600X. If you actually have a use for 32 gigs of RAM, you probably also have a use for Ryzen 7 for the 8 cores. You're doing content creation, virtual machine, software development. The $100 price increase for Ryzen 5 1600 to Ryzen 7 1700 makes a lot of sense if you actually need 32 gigs. So really, it's 16 gigs or 16 gigs. Now, how fast should the RAM be? First of all, the fastest officially supported RAM with Ryzen is DDR4 2666. Anything over that is overclocked and not guaranteed. No RAM you buy is going to be guaranteed to run on all boards faster than 2666. If you simply want to plug it in and know 100% for sure that it's going to work in any B350 board that you buy DDR4 2666. It's very nice. Now you can buy slower and generally clock it to 2666. Most 2400 RAM and even 2133 is going to run at 2666 just fine, but you might have to play with the timings. Is it worth saving $5 or $10 on the RAM to have to go into the BIOS and maybe increase the CL rating by 1 or 2, play with the various timings? Honestly, it's lunch. Buy the 2666 and be done with it. Right now in the middle of September 2017, when I'm recording this, there's a $20 price difference between 2666, if I can say that correctly, and 3200. It's about $150 for 3200 and about $130 for 2666. Now, if you buy 3200 and your system does not boot when you set it to 3200, try 2933. Most sticks will work at 2933. If it doesn't work there, then you'll have to drop it down to 2666. You can, of course, also tinker with the RAM timings. So are you willing to spend the $20 and roll the dice on the gamble that it will run at the faster speed? Does it make a difference? I'll give you an example. Ghost Recon Wildlands doing benchmark testing. 61 frames per second versus 60. It was exactly 1 frame per second difference at 1080p at very high detail on a nice graphics card between 2666 and 3200. Now there are situations and times where it makes a bigger difference. File work, virtual machines, software development, video rendering speed, and Handbrake, for example, does show a larger difference. There are times, but generally it's a fairly small difference. You're talking about a couple of percentage points. My video machine does not run at 3200 because I run 32 gigs of RAM, and it's very hard to get 32 gigs of RAM on Ryzen to run at 3200 megahertz. So I run at 2933 on my system. My opinion, the deal, spend the 130, get 2666 if you're buying a Ryzen 5. Do you want more performance? Put the money into a faster CPU. Put it into a nicer SSD. Put it into a nicer graphics card. Don't put it into faster RAM. The only time to spend the money on faster RAM is if you already have the best graphics card, you already have the best CPU. If you're buying a Ryzen 7 1700X, yes, absolutely you should buy 3200. It's worth the $20. On a Ryzen 5, don't bother. That leads us to the storage options. Now, we installed 2 different drives. I'm going to talk about SSDs first. The wonderful ADATA 128 gigabyte NVMe solid state drive. This thing is about $70. It's only $15 more than the SATA 120 gig SSDs. If you're on a budget, but you still want great performance, if you want a drive that's 4 times faster than a serial ATA solid-state drive, here's your option. It also comes with a very nice cooler on it. If you watched the build video, you saw how nice it looks with the red heatsink on top, the XPG branding. It is pretty cool. That being said, for $20 more than this, you can buy the ADATA SU800 serial ATA solid-state drive, 256 gigabytes, so $20 more buys you twice the space. What would I personally choose? I'd buy the SU800 256 gigs. On a system of this level, I don't personally think NVMe is required, but of course some people disagree with me. Some people want a little bit faster boot time, faster program load time, and the super snappiness that comes with having a true NVMe solid-state drive. It is worth noting that you can buy that SU800 in the M.2 form factor. If you watch the build video and goes, boy, that was really easy just putting that right into that slot. You didn't have to wire power cables and data cables. You just put it right on the motherboard. No problem. You can buy the serial ATA drive. It'll fit on that board and install exactly like this did. For $20 more, you get twice the space. So do you want 4 times the speed or twice the space for a bit more money? Honestly, that just comes down to a personal preference. Now let's talk about brands for a minute. Now I like ADATA drives. I have an ADATA drive, an older drive, in my $4,000 2016 system, my Broadwell E machine. I'm going to have one in my $4,000 2017 machine. You can actually see it back there. That's the Skylake X full tower back there. I do like them. I've used them for a number of years. They are actually a larger company than I think a lot of people realize. They've been around for many, many years. But there are other great choices available as well. If you look in the 250 gigabyte size, 240, 250, and 256 size, you have the Samsung 850 EVO, you have the Crucial MX300, you have the SanDisk Ultra 2. There's actually a lot of drives available in that price point. If I was buying a 250 gig drive tomorrow, the SU800, the Samsung 850 EVO, the Crucial MX300, and the SanDisk Ultra 2, those are the drives to buy. Of all the drives that I covered in my which SSD video should you buy, there were 10 drives on the desk. It's actually those 4 would be my top 4 if I really had to narrow it down. At that point, buy based on personal preference with brand and price. You won't notice the difference in speed between any of those 4 drives in your machine. I have all those drives in active use in machines. I can't tell the difference between any of them, no matter what the benchmark charts say. A great example is the fastest drive among those is the Samsung 850 EVO, and the slowest drive is the Crucial MX300. I couldn't tell you that from using them, and I've got the MX300 as a boot drive in machines. It's very, very quick, so pick based upon preference and price. How much size should you buy? Is 128 gigs enough? Do you need 256 gigs? What about 500? Size comes down to what programs you're installing. Do you want to put your games on your SSD? If so, that's probably not going to be large enough. Are you okay to have the games on the hard drive and just have super fast boot performance? Then it might be enough. So that just comes down to what you want to put on there. Me personally, my own machines, I will no longer build with anything smaller than a 500 gig. Programs are far too large these days, and frankly, it's a pain in the neck to move Windows to a new drive when you start running out of space. Yes, you can add a second SSD and you can install some programs on the second drive, but it's just easier to have a larger C drive. So if you have the option and the money, you'll find that on a per gigabyte basis, the 500 gig drives, which are really the 480s, 500s, and 512s, are lower cost per gigabyte than the 250s and even the 120s. But of course, you're spending more money. Now, what about hard drives? Now, really, hard drives aren't very exciting anymore, and they don't get a lot of press coverage. And we're really down to 3 companies at this point: Toshiba, Western Digital, and Seagate. Yes, you'll see some other drives still being advertised. They're actually owned by those 3 companies. And the reality is the platters that go in the drives really are kind of made in one factory these days. That's why the drive companies all pretty much sell the same product at the same price. There's no longer the rate of innovation we had just a few years ago because it's all about the solid-state drive. However, I still see people asking, well, should I buy a Seagate drive or a Western Digital? Which one is more reliable? They're both reliable. The reality is your odds of getting a defective drive come down to random chance more than anything else. You can buy 10 drives and run them for 10 years and they'll be fine, or you could buy 10 drives and have 3 of them fail in a month. It's random chance. They're all supposed to last a very long time, but drives fail. So ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not backing up your data, you're running the risk of failure, no matter what drive that you buy. If you're interested in an inexpensive backup solution, please let me recommend Backblaze. There is an affiliate link down in the bottom of all of my video descriptions. I am a paying customer of Backblaze. I've been so long before I had a YouTube channel. $5 a month, unlimited online backup, and it really is unlimited and it really is fast. All the videos of my YouTube channel, all of the raw data, all of my personal business data beyond YouTube is backed up with Backblaze. I have 3 different accounts that I back up 3 different machines. My personal machine, my work machine, and my wife's machine are all backed up with Backblaze. It is a great service. Free trial, go give it a try if you need to back up your data. All drives will fail at some point, some sooner than others. If you don't care about your data, don't back up. If you do, back it up. Buying one drive over another because you think it might be more reliable is a fool's errand if you think that's going to keep your data safe and it's important to you. Anyway, moving on from that, let's talk about size and speed. Most of the smaller consumer level drives are 7200 RPM these days. The Barracuda 1, 2, and 3 terabyte drives from Seagate and the 1, 2, and 3 terabyte drives from Western Digital, the Blues, are generally 7200 RPM, although be cautious because both companies do make both of those drives in 5400 RPM variety. If you are installing your games to these drives, get the 7200 RPM version, and that's where it can be confusing because there are Western Digital Blue 1 terabyte drives that are 7200 RPM, and there's Western Digital 1 terabyte Blues that are 5400 RPM, and they're not often clearly marked, so be sure you know what you're buying. Now, Toshiba has their X300 line that runs up to, I believe, 8 terabyte now at 7200 RPM, although they get expensive as they get larger. Those are fine as well, although in my experience, the Toshiba drives are louder than the Western Digitals and the Seagates are, so if you care about noise, sorry Toshiba, but I would skip those. One special point about hard drives, Seagate makes some large drives that they call archive drives. They are great for storing things like YouTube videos that are not accessed or used or written very often. They are not meant to be run programs from. Don't install your Steam library to a Seagate archive drive, and they should be clearly marked archive on them. Most of those are generally in the 8 terabyte size, and you can often find the external versions of those very cheap. I recently picked up 2 more Seagate 8 terabyte external drives from Newegg on sale for $150 a piece. That is a crazy cheap price, but they are completely unsuitable for running programs. Their random performance is atrocious. However, they're great for backing up data. So if you need a backup drive, that's an option. But you really want to make sure that you're buying a standard Barracuda or a standard Western Digital Blue or Black drive if you want to install and run programs like Steam games. What about system cases? Oh boy, this is a topic that deserves its own video. There's like about 1 billion cases out on the market. Now this is a very nice case, and the non-RGB version is $49. And for $49, it's a lot of case. It does come with case fans, just not RGB. It's got the glass on the side either way. It's got the power supply mounted on the bottom to keep the cables out of the way. It looks really nice. There's the SSD mount inside. Nice case for $50, but in the $50 price range, there are a ton of options from a ton of companies. If you prefer Corsair, for example, they've got the 100R if you sort of want the black muted look. They have the Spec 01, the Spec 02, and the Spec 03 cases for about $50 to $60 if you want more of a gamer look with the red LED lights in the front and the grill in the front. By the way, the difference between the Spec 01, 2, and 3 cases is the internal arrangement where the drive cages and what accessories come with them. Otherwise, they're all basically the same case. And in fact, the 100R is the same case as the Spec. It's just a different front bezel on the front. The grill look, sort of the aggressive gamer look, as opposed to the flat black look on the front. So it's just a style difference. Otherwise, they're the same case inside. If you want something slightly bigger than this, check out the non-light version of the case, the MasterBox 5. Now, I don't know if it's going to continue being sold. I've actually sent an email to Cooler Master to ask because it is larger than this. It's a little bit taller and a little bit wider and has a few more expansion options, but it is an older case and it doesn't have the glass on the side, but it is about a $50 case. I've used it before. I put my i7 7700K build in there. A little bit too much computer for that case. An i5 or a Ryzen 5 would be better for it. If you do want to go with a Ryzen 7 or an i7, speaking of cases, would I put it into this or would I put it into the Corsair Spec 01? No, I wouldn't. You really should have something like a Master Case Pro, not a MasterBox, if you want to go with something like that. If you're going with Corsair, the Obsidian 450D for about $100 is what I would go with. Or NZXT, and some other companies have some great cases. Really, cases are very personal choice. There's the combination of size and expansion features, how many slots, where the power supply goes, what the front looks like, what kind of fans it comes with. And then there's also the look. Is it LED or RGB? Is it black? Is it white? That's just a personal choice. But as a general rule, $50 to $70 is a great price point for an i5 or a Ryzen 5 machine, something in the $800 to $1,200 price range. If you're going to go above the $1,200 price range or go with an i7 or a Ryzen 7 CPU, please do yourself a favor. Skip the $50 cases, skip the $70 cases, and go right to the $100 price point. For a $1,500 machine, which is really what an i5 or a Ryzen 7 is going to turn into if you do it right with appropriate components, you really deserve to spend $100 on your case. That Corsair Obsidian 450D, for example, it's a mid-tower. This is a mid-tower. Rest assured, they're not the same thing. The space, the cabling options, the grommets, the thickness of the metal that they're made out of, the expansion and upgrade options that are included are far superior on the $100 cases. Don't want the Corsair? The Master Case series from Cooler Master is going to be a much better option for those. And I'm going to be using the Master Case 6 Pro for my upcoming i7 build when the next generation launches. So I'm not going to do that again and put an i7 CPU into a $50 case. That's the one big regret I have with that build that I did. Now, what about full towers? I don't think very many people build in full towers except for me, who has most of my computers in full towers because, hey, I'm from Texas and we like everything big here. But if you look behind me, that is a Corsair Obsidian 750D. The 750D is the full tower version of the 450D. It does cost more, but boy, does it have expansion space for days. I posted a picture on Twitter with the MSI Duke GTX 1080 Ti triple fan oversized factory overclock card installed in there, and when I posted the picture on Twitter, several people replied and said, is there a new single slot Duke card now? Have they come out with a smaller card? No, the case is just that big inside. When I posted the picture, it actually made it look like a small single slot card because there's so much room in there. The average person doesn't need a full tower case. I'm going to be installing a lot of expansion options in there, and frankly, I like large full tower cases. They run cool and they run quiet. I mentioned before that I was able to run my Skylake X at 55 degrees Celsius with the cooler fans turned down to 600 RPM, which makes that machine absolutely, utterly silent. Part of the reason that works is there is so much room for airflow in that case that nothing overheats. Everything from the voltage regulators to the graphics cards to the radiators to the intake flow to the exhaust flow, nothing gets hot in that case because there's so much room. If I installed all those components in, with respect, something of this size, I might not be able to do that due to heat buildup. So that is one advantage of a larger case, is reduced noise, because you have so much more room for all those 140 millimeter fans. And then we come to power supply, once again a topic that really deserves its own video. This has the upcoming MasterWatt 450 $50 450 watt power supply. In the middle of October, you're going to see the video on that. It turns out that was supposed to be released this month, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. In fact, 3 hours before I posted the giveaway video for this computer, Cooler Master actually emailed me and said, hey, can you hold off on releasing that because we've delayed the release of the power supply to October. I actually replied back to him and I said, the video is finished, rendered, and uploaded, and I'm posting it in 3 hours. Really? They replied and said, okay, fair enough. You can go ahead and do the giveaway with it, but please hold off on the individual video and don't talk about it too much until it releases because it's not actually for sale at the moment. So I'm not going to talk about it in detail except to say this one point. That got me excited. When I took that out of the box and started playing with it, that's got my new 2 thumbs up recommendation. Watch for the video because it isn't actually for sale for the moment, but for the features and capability, that's going to replace the EVGA 500 watt 80 plus bronze that I've previously recommended. And I actually own several of and have used them in both upgrades and new builds. But what that has going for it, blows away the other power supplies on the market, and I really do like it. So you can't buy one yet, but it's awesome, and in October you'll be able to. But if for whatever reason you don't want to go with it, you don't like Cooler Master or whatever, the EVGA 500 watt B power supply generally runs between $40 to $50. It's a great power supply. It's not at all modular, but it's a good unit. The Corsair CX series would be the comparable level. Do you need more than that? Not for this build. If you're building something in a $50 case with a Ryzen 5 or i5, a 450 to 550 watt power supply is all you need. Don't waste your money buying a 800 watt power supply. That's extreme overkill. Even 450 is enough for an i7 or a Ryzen 7, even up to a GTX 1080. Just to give you some numbers, this CPU, even overclocked, isn't going to pull more than about 110 to 120 watts of power. Even at 4 gigahertz, it's not going to. Even if we replace the graphics card in here with a GTX 1080, that's going to struggle to pull more than 200 watts of power, even overclocked. You're looking at maybe 300-ish, maybe 325 watts of power. Add in the SSD, the RAM, the motherboard, etc. Okay, fine, you're at 350-ish watts of power. A 450 watt power supply has plenty of reserves there. You don't need more. A 500 is completely plenty. Even up to a GTX 1080, a 500 watt power supply would be enough. So why do the 700, 800, 900 watt power supplies exist? Overclocked i7s, i9s, Threadrippers, and possibly Ryzen 7 1800Xs overclocked to 4 gigahertz with dual graphics cards. They also exist for RX Vega 64, which consumes a ridiculous amount of power. If you haven't seen the reviews on the Vega cards, I do have one. I'm going to cover that here shortly, but since you can't buy one, I'm not in a hurry. But boy, they do sure use a lot of power. So if you want to do that, especially if you want to do 2 of them in Crossfire, which actually isn't supported by the drivers yet, but it should be at some point, okay, fine, you need more power supply. Anything up to about $1,000, maybe $1,200 machine, a 500 watt power supply is all that you need. If you're building a $1,500 to $2,000 machine, would I buy one of these or the EVGA or Corsair CX series? No, I wouldn't. I'd buy maybe a 650 to 850 watt 80 plus gold power supply, either the V series from Cooler Master or the G series from EVGA or the RM series from Corsair. They're all very good units and they're all very similar in terms of price, capabilities, etc. Well, that was a whole bunch of information. Sitting here talking for several hours while I get all this recorded certainly is, it's a lot of work. So if this was helpful to you or useful in any way, please do me a big favor. When you're doing your shopping online, if you're shopping in Amazon and Newegg, everything I talked about will be linked down in the description below. Use those links when you're shopping. It really does make a difference. Links to Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon are down there as well. I would certainly appreciate it. And then the full playlist of videos on this computer, including the build, if you'd like to see a step-by-step build on this machine. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with that big huge red button directly below. Questions and comments in the comment section, and comments on future videos along this line. Would you like to see this done with higher end and lower end machines? Do you like this format? Please let me know what you think down below. And then as always, the video description is where all the good stuff is at. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.